So I'm delighted to have been joined by Oliver Maurice of the International National Trusts Organisation. And Oliver, we spoke to you this time last year in Copenhagen. What's been happening in the last year? You know, I know you were really keen to get engaged with climate change issues, and how's it moved forward for you?
Well, I think it has moved forward. For a start, the organisation has grown. We've now got 46 members. Two joined 2 weeks ago. And while I think there is probably a ceiling to the number of organisations operating at a national level that looking after the cultural and the natural heritage, perhaps 100 or so, I think that we're working hard at trying to get the message across that the conservation of the cultural and natural heritage, both tangible and intangible, is extremely important. And of course, the effect of climate change, and particularly at this conference I've noticed, the word culture doesn't actually seem to come across very often. And I think we have a role to play in promoting the idea that if people realise that their cultural heritage, that the intangible cultural heritage is being lost, then it will be much more meaningful to those people. I'm talking now about the developing countries, for example, where there are floods or deforestation or whatever it happens to be. Cultures of people are being removed from their environment, and that is, in my view, going to be a huge loss. And we've got to try and address that particular issue, because people are having to be relocated. Small island states, for example, if they become submerged in water, they are going to have to move, and it's already happening. And a whole culture is being lost, a whole cultural heritage is being lost. And that is something that I think we, as INTU, the International National Trust Organisation, have a role to play to try and get the message across to people so they really understand not that it's just the natural heritage which is at risk, but the culture as well.
It's fascinating, because I think certainly in the UK, where we're from, the National Trust is typically kind of associated with old buildings or kind of with areas of beauty. Do you think that there's going to be an increasing role then for the organisation in trying to be a guardian of culture more broadly, and a guardian of culture more broadly, where it's threatened by kind of climate change? Is that something that you're genuinely kind of thinking about?
I think when INTU was set up, climate change was always on the agenda, but it wasn't uppermost in our minds. I think we've moved on since our foundation in 2007. And yes, I mean, I think the intangible culture, we've always been about tangible and intangible heritage. That is unquestionable. But I think intangible cultural heritage, the actual cultures, the customs of the country, if you like, the arts, the puppetry, music and all that, the local traditions, we lose those at our peril, frankly, because not only is, and also, of course, the built cultural heritage. I mean, that is obviously desperately important, and that's what national trusts tend to be known for. And it is important. I mean, there's no question, in my view, that restoring an old building is a far greener thing to do than knocking it down and building a new one. And I've just been on a visit to 4 African countries, all of which are members of INTU. And I've been appalled at the speed with which historic buildings are disappearing. In Addis Ababa, for example, we have a member there called Addis Wubet, and the person who is running that organisation, she tells me that they're disappearing at the rate of 3 a week in the centre of Addis Ababa. She's putting up a very strong fight. She happens to be the granddaughter of the late Emperor Haile Selassie, so she has good contacts, and I'm sure she's doing a very good job. In Uganda, the Cross-Cultural Foundation for Uganda, which is also a member of INTU, I spent 5 days there. One of the plans was to go and have a look at a prospective new office building for them in a historic building, which they felt could be used as an exemplar. They could set it up, they restore the building, set it up as their office, probably have a shop there selling local produce and so on. when we got there, the building had disappeared. They hadn't visited it for 2 months, it had been flattened. And that's the government. And one of the issues that I was addressing when I was in Africa was actually talking to government ministers, particularly in Uganda, and trying to stress to them that the cultural heritage is terribly important, because they lose it at their peril, as I said before. It's a tourist potential for a start, but also it's the history of the country. And if you lose your history, there's nothing to look to in the past. You have, for an educational point of view, for children, it is vital that we retain the history so they can see how their ancestors lived and so on. So I just think, we have a huge role to play, quite frankly. It's an enormous task.
And how are you going to go about that? Because when it comes to protecting a building, as you say, it's tangible. You can see whether a building is kind of looked after, and you can see whether it's been maintained. If we're talking about protecting traditions and kind of the broader kind of cultures that are threatened due to climate change, what kind of tools do you have at your disposal, do you think?
Well, that is certainly a difficult one. But as far as INTU is concerned, we're not actually practitioners as such. We are dependent upon the organisations who are our members to be the practitioners, and the best way we can do that is by networking, by sharing good practice, best practice, if you like. We have an international conference every other year when we bring all the INTU members together, and a lot of others besides who may join as well. And we share best practices. So, for example, our next conference is in Victoria, British Columbia, next year in October. And we will be there addressing the issues of climate change and taking different examples of how our members are coping with this, particular customs. And in fact, the theme of the conference is connecting people, places and stories. And so that in itself is a single message about what we're aiming to achieve at that conference. So yes, I don't think we can do it single-handedly, but we can do it through our members.
And presumably you've got an enormous membership now, and there's a diverse range of countries around the world. There must be some very varied opinions about climate change from within your membership, I would guess, because certainly in the UK and in the US it's a divisive issue still sometimes. Does that pose a problem, or do you think there's the momentum now that people really recognise this is something that's essential that we deal with?
I think it is. The message is getting through, and I was listening yesterday to the heads of government and the president of Mexico in a debate about climate change, and the heads of government were all from the developing countries. And they were explaining the need for a greater amount of finance to come from the developed countries. And I know that this is a big issue, but I think if at the end of this conference an agreement can be reached as to how that money should be dispersed, bearing in mind also that there is, in my view at least, there are some issues about dispersing that money, because I'm sorry to have to say, but a lot of the governments around the world are very corrupt, and this witnessed my visit to Zimbabwe. I won't go into that in great detail, but it's horrific, frankly, what is going on there, and I would be very wary about giving money out from the developed countries to developing countries unless there can be some sort of guarantee that the money will be used for the defined purpose for which it's intended.
So of course, that's one of the big issues at these talks: how to monitor the flow of finance, not only to make sure that it's the promised finance is being delivered, but also then to make sure that it's being spent in the right ways. Which is incredibly complex issues. So just to wrap up, then, this time next year, if we're in Durban and into there as well, what do you hope to be saying to me? What would you like INTU to be looking forward to then?
I would personally like to see INTU's name on more leaflets as joint signatories. For instance, the funding that we've just been talking about, which Oxfam did a presentation, and there were 215 signatories to the paper they had produced. Our name wasn't on it. Now, that is because we haven't got the message through about who we are and what we're doing to some of these international organizations. So I would hope that by this time next year we will be a bigger voice. I would very much like to hope that we might even have a platform to speak about our work and the importance of cultural heritage, and indeed get the message across about culture being so important, not just the natural heritage.
Oliver, it's been really interesting to speak to you, so we'll wrap it up there, and maybe we'll talk to you again next year.
Thanks very much, Alan.